And we kind of got this information from the SEC that, well, actually, we think everything other than Bitcoin is a security. And we kind of said to ourselves, well, that's not our understanding of the law. How are you coming to this conclusion? Why there's contradictory statements between them and the CFTC? We didn't really get any feedback from them. And suddenly we got this Wells notice and then the complaint that was filed yesterday. By the way, that would also kind of mean like the end of the crypto industry in the US. Once we have that legislation in place, I think we'll start to see some of the entrepreneurs who've left the US come back. If we go back to 2021, Coinbase, we wanted to become a public company. We described everything about our business, the assets that we list on our platform, how we do staking. And the SEC at that point allowed us to become a public company. And, fast forward, a year later, we started to hear some conflicting statements from the SEC, the CFTC. Generally, when we hear updated information from regulators, we go in and we talk to them. We say, great, if the rules have changed, how can we adjust? And an example of that was they said XRP we think might be a security. We said, okay, we want to act in good faith. We'll delist it. We don't know if it's a security or not, and that court case is still playing out. But we want to be collaborative and work with regulators. And then something shifted about a year ago. A totally different tone started to happen. And we kind of got this information from the SEC that, well, actually, we think everything other than Bitcoin is a security. And we kind of said to ourselves, well, that's not our understanding of the law. How are you coming to this conclusion? And we were sort of met with silence, right? We did a series of meetings with them, probably 30 meetings over the last 12 months, where they asked us every question under the sun. We kind of, told them everything we could about our business, but we didn't really get clarity from them about how we could come in and register, which assets they had a concern with, why there's contradictory statements between them and the CFTC. We didn't really get any feedback from them. And suddenly we got this Wells notice and then the complaint that was filed yesterday. By the way, that would also kind of mean like the end of the crypto industry in the US if that was actually what happened. And so we have to go to court to challenge that. We're proud to do it for the industry and for America. Yeah, well, there are certainly crypto securities out there. In fact, Coinbase has reviewed well over 1,000 different assets. 90% of them we've rejected. So I agree with the statement. There's a lot of crypto securities out there. In fact, I would like there to be a robust, healthy market for people to trade crypto securities in the US. I think this is one more area where crypto could help update the financial system around capital formation. And we should make it easier for people to raise money for their company or for something they want to build in the world. And those should be issued and registered as crypto securities. We filed a petition formally with the SEC to try to get clarity about how that could happen. We acquired a broker-dealer license, which is dormant because we haven't found a way to activate it with the SEC. So I would like there to be a robust market for trading crypto securities. The 10% or less of assets that we've reviewed that we did decide to list, we feel that those are crypto commodities. We don't claim to be a broker dealer or, we've acquired a broker dealer license that's still dormant because they won't allow us to activate it. But for the assets that we do trade, those are commodities, so they don't require those registration. This is a deeply technical topic in the law, and I'll tell you my interpretation of it in a second. But it's worth noting that in the United States, we have a securities regulator, the SEC. We also have a commodities regulator. And so partly this is a major topic of debate in the US is like, which one is it? But in other countries, like in the UK, for instance, they just have one financial regulator for both. And it's funny, they spend like 1% of their time even discussing this issue as some sort of like kind of wonky, interesting topic. But it's a massive issue in the US just because we have two separate federal regulators, and there's kind of like a turf war, political, power. And so what we need in the United States at this point to get regulatory clarity, unblock this issue, get rid of the turf war, is regulatory clarity. And I think what's going to happen now, since the CFTC and the SEC have not been able to sort of, figure this out, is we're going to have Congress step in and draft legislation that will unblock this issue in the United States, or we're going to have the courts create more case law, which is partly what we can do by going to court with the SEC here. Is it just helping get case law created. The UK, Singapore, Hong Kong, like the UAE, every financial hub in the world is kind of saying, hey, we want to be the future crypto Web3 hub, and we have clear rules. Europe just passed comprehensive crypto legislation way ahead of the US. So usually we think of ourselves as kind of innovative leaders around technology in the US. We're taking notes now from Europe because we haven't gotten this figured out. So the SEC complaint sort of said, of the over 200 assets on our platform, we have a concern about these 13. So it was a relatively small percentage. If any of those four prongs of the Howey test are invalidated, it may not be a security, right? And again, this is something the courts would have to kind of really dig into. But an example would be, in the Solana case, right? Let's say that if something has sufficiently been decentralized, that could be an argument, right? This is actually an interesting sort of nuanced point. Some things could be a commodity from day one. Other types of crypto assets, they may start as a security because they're just raising money for a project that could be something in the future. But then as that project launches and it decentralizes and it develops utility, it may actually convert to being a commodity at some point, right? They start to try to address this issue of how and when would an asset that started as a security become a commodity, right? So anyway, there's a lot of details where in a moment in time you have to look at it. It could be different a year later. Anyway, with every asset we've listed on our platform, we did extensive diligence. We did I think it was like a 72-point legal analysis. We rejected 90% of the assets. Every asset we decided to list, we felt there was a strong argument that it was a commodity, and that's what we're going to go to court to win on. So that's not really how I think of it. Remember, the goal of this lawsuit is to get clarity for the industry, right? That may be what they say, but I can assure you there's a huge lack of clarity. I mean, every startup in the crypto space is spending huge amounts of money on legal, lawyers who basically tell them, I don't know, there's no case law. We can't really give you a clear answer, right? And the SEC has really failed to kind of publish a clear set of guidance. You may have seen in front of Congress, Patrick McHenry asked the chair just a very simple question on one asset. Is Ethereum a security or a commodity? And over again, he refused to answer. I mean, so even on some of the biggest assets, they can't just give you a clear answer. If we get any kind of clarity from the court, regardless of the outcome, honestly, I think it would be a step in the right direction. But we feel strongly all of the ones that we listed there, since we took a pretty conservative approach, they are commodities. We also look at the cybersecurity kind of the credibility of the token. Some of these smart contracts could have issues that might harm customers, and so we do a cybersecurity analysis. We also do a compliance review of the asset and the founding team. So based on that, the committee, which has a diverse set of skills of different people in finance and cyber and legal and all kinds of things, they make the listing decisions. We've rejected over 90% of the assets we've reviewed, so I think that's a good start. And then I feel pretty comfortable about the analysis. I think as the SEC goes in to look at it, really as the court goes in to look at it, because the SEC has already seen all of this, I think they'll find it to be a very rigorous analysis. The irony of this is that we were continuously asking them during this period, can you give us more clarity? That's how it's supposed to work. Like, the regulator publishes the rules and then everybody has to follow them, right? So you have to remember that there were no rules. We couldn't really get any feedback from them about, was this asset okay or was that not? Why, right? And so with them sort of abdicating that responsibility, we essentially had to create our own process. And I think we did a really good job of that, working with some of the best legal minds in the world. And so I think it's pretty unfair, and I think this is not a good fact pattern for them that a jury or a judge would look at, is to say, look, this company was formally petitioning you for clarity. They met with you 30 times. They developed their own internal framework, working with the best lawyers in the world, and you never gave them any feedback on it. And then you hit them with this enforcement action. That's not fair. In crypto, for many of these assets, there is no common enterprise or central authority that would be responsible, say, for issuing disclosures or something like that. Like the Ethereum network, there's not any one group that controls it. It's decentralized, right? And so we actually, we put out this petition to the SEC. People can Google it if they want. I think it's Coinbase petition to the SEC. You can kind of read it. And we actually, a lot of these are really technical legal questions, but there's about 40 different areas where we felt like the current law was a little unclear on this, like decentralization, utility. What does that mean in context of open source software, right? Who would issue the disclosures if there's not a common enterprise, right? So there's a lot of open questions like that, which we don't feel have been answered. Disclosures could be an important part of that. And actually, one of the nice things about crypto is that you can actually go look at a lot of this data on chain. It's public. There's a couple of companies that are trying to find ways to sort of better aggregate it and sort of say, okay, here's the distribution of all the people who own it. How long have they owned it? What price did they buy it at? Are they insiders or are they, just third parties? And trying to get better insights. So anyway, I think that kind of thing is really important. And again, it needs to be updated for this new technology, which is a little different than what's come before. Yeah, I mean, I think this is what the courts and Congress need to figure out is where should that line be? And honestly, reasonable people could disagree. There's probably somewhere there, and ultimately our goal is we're already licensed by the CFTC, and we have the dormant license from the SEC. We would like to be in a world where we're just licensed and regulated by both. Bitcoin and Ethereum are the majority of our revenue today in the trading world, right? Now, we also make quite a bit of revenue. Almost 50% of our revenue is from non-trading fees, right? And then we also have revenue outside of the United States, right? So I guess even in that scenario, yes, we're a viable business and there's lots of things, but I also think that's just not what's going to happen because that's not where Congress is headed. That's not what the courts will decide. I mean, we're here to stay. I created this company in the United States because I believe it's a big market, but there's rule of law, and there's a willingness to generally do the right thing, even if it takes a few iterations. So we are going to continue to be in the U.S. We're going to be the leader in the U.S. The U.S. is going to get to the right outcome, whether it's through the courts, Congress, the CFTC. Something is going to come to fruition, or maybe the 2024 elections will change this. America has a way of healing, right? Like, if the winds blow this way and then 4 to 8 years later, they kind of blow the other way. And eventually we get to the right outcome, even if it takes a while. At the same time, while we're going to be the leader in the US, we're going to be a multinational. We have entities in all the major financial hubs, or many of them at this point. And I want to be an American company that has a global footprint. I think they're actually very different, and it was kind of unfortunate that they were done back to back. My guess is that might have been deliberate to try to conflate the issue. But just to give you some examples, I mean, and I don't want to say anything about any other companies in the space, but I'll just talk about Coinbase. So there were no allegations in our complaint about misappropriation of customer funds or wash trading. There was no naming of me or the executive team personally. It really was just a question on this technical matter of are these securities or commodities? And I guess it's also important to note, as you said earlier too, I mean, Coinbase is based in the US, we're a public company, so that means we have strict requirements around, for instance, like audited financial statements. So when we say that customer funds are segregated and they're backed one-to-one, you don't have to take our word for it. I wouldn't say our approach has been confrontational. It is with great, we never relished the opportunity or the idea of ending up in litigation with our regulator. In fact, quite the opposite. I mean, we spent 30 meetings over the last year trying to be as helpful and collaborative as we could and really got no feedback, right? We decided to become a public company, which, and shared all this information with them. So there's a lot of really good people at the SEC, and we've had no issue working with every other regulator out there, both in the US, but also international. So the first one is we just need to get some clarity about the market structure and how, the CFTC and the SEC are both going to regulate this industry. What are the boundaries? I think we also need to just bring in some basic consumer protections, which are, around wash trading prevention, AML, KYC, having audited financial statements. These are just kind of best practices that can come over from traditional financial services and be applied to crypto. And then I think we also need to get a little bit more clarity about stablecoins, because that's been a really big use case and area of growth for crypto. And so there's still a little bit of lack of clarity there about how issuance works and things like that. So it's actually not rocket science. This is just applying some of these really basic common sense ideas to the industry. And then once we have that legislation in place, I think we'll start to see some of the entrepreneurs who've left the US come back and say, okay, I feel that we're not just going to be attacked randomly or have incredibly high legal bills at any given moment, and we can actually build a business here in the US again.